Before diving into this incredible story, consider subscribing to the channel and hitting the bell. Every story here has something to say, and you won't want to miss a single one. In Manhattan, in one of the city's most prestigious hotels, everything shone with luxury and sophistication. The chandeliers glittered, the marble floors reflected the elegant silhouettes of the guests, and the air seemed permeated with the scent of success and power. Yet, behind this facade of perfection, hid an invisible world, that of the employees who kept the hotel running day and night, often without recognition, enduring stress, fatigue, and humiliation. Emily Thompson, the hotel owner's only daughter, had grown up in this gilded but protected world. Her life was punctuated by receptions, social gatherings, and absolute comfort. However, a persistent curiosity tormented her. How much did the employees really know about the reality of their work? How were those she rarely saw treated, and whose daily lives were so different from her own? Determined to understand, Emily made a bold decision. She would pose as a simple cleaner, adopting a uniform, a fictitious name, Lisa, and a new, invisible identity. She wanted to observe the staff and customers without her privileged status getting in the way. What Emily didn't yet know was that this experience would confront her with a cruel reality: public humiliation, prejudice, mockery, and injustice. She would discover how difficult it is to maintain one's dignity when one is perceived as inferior, even for a few hours. And in this immersion, she would learn a lesson that neither money nor power could teach her: respect and humility must be earned, and sometimes, you have to hit rock bottom to understand the value of others. Morning dawned over Manhattan with a clear, bright sky, but Emily Thompson had no intention of enjoying the view. She stood in the small service room reserved for staff, observing her reflection in the mirror. Her housekeeper's uniform was perfectly tailored, her hair tied back in a strict bun, and her face barely wore any makeup. She was no longer Emily, the owner's daughter; she was now Lisa, an ordinary employee ready to face the day. Silently, she walked down the hotel corridors. The employees eyed her with curiosity and suspicion. Some whispered among themselves, others regarded her with a mixture of mockery and caution. Emily understood immediately that anonymity did not mean being invisible. Every gesture, every glance, was scrutinized. Her first task: cleaning the rooms on the third floor. As soon as she entered the first room, the luxury of the place struck her. The crisp white sheets, the fluffy pillows, the polished wood furniture, everything contrasted with the physical exertion of her role. Emily realized she'd underestimated the staff's workload. The meticulous cleaning, the demanding customers, the race against time, it all required patience and endurance. Soon, she faced her first difficulty. A guest, Mr. Richard Caldwell, an arrogant businessman in an impeccable suit, burst into her room. "What are you doing? This isn't how you lay out towels," he shouted, his eyes flashing. Emily, her heart pounding, bowed slightly and tried to answer calmly, "I'm tidying the room, sir." But he wasn't listening. His criticisms poured out non-stop, and Emily had to absorb every word without being able to defend herself. She understood then that the humiliation didn't just come from social status, but from the way some customers imposed their power, treating employees like objects rather than human beings. Through this first encounter, Emily felt an unexpected mix of frustration, fear, and deep empathy for those who experienced this daily. She realized that her experience, though voluntary, taught her a valuable lesson about resilience and humility. The second floor of the hotel was busier than the third. Emily, still going by the name Lisa, focused on her tasks. She thought she could go unnoticed, but she soon encountered the harsh reality of her role. A client, Mr. Richard Caldwell, had booked the presidential suite. As soon as she entered the room to clean it, he was already there, standing by the window, a glass of whiskey in his hand and a look of displeasure. "You dare enter here without permission?" he snapped, his tone chilling. Emily tried to remain calm. "I'm in charge of cleaning the room, sir," she began timidly. But her words fell on deaf ears. Caldwell pointed to a slightly shifted cushion on the sofa. "This is not acceptable. You must follow the instructions exactly." He then began to berate her in front of the floor staff and other guests passing by. His voice, loud and authoritative, echoed throughout the lobby. Emily felt her face burn with shame. She, the owner's daughter, now found herself humiliated like any other novice employee. Every criticism, every harsh word, hit her hard, and she had to smile politely, nod, and continue her work, unable to defend herself without revealing her identity. Colleagues passing by the room exchanged sympathetic or amused glances. Emily then understood the magnitude of what the staff endured daily: contempt, incessant criticism, and the pressure of a world where a simple misstep could turn a day into a nightmare. For the first time, she felt an unexpected mixture: humiliation, anger, and a deep empathy for the men and women who faced these humiliations every day. She began to understand that her experience was not a game, but a life lesson about respect, dignity, and resilience. At the end of the day, exhausted and confused, Emily returned to the small service room, her heart heavy but her mind alert. She already knew that this immersion would change her perception of the world and her own life. By the third day of her immersion, Emily was beginning to realize that the hardest part wasn't just the demanding customers or the exhausting tasks, but the way others looked at her. The hotel employees, accustomed to the anonymity of their work, seemed to be scrutinizing her every move. In the staff corridor, some people were whispering to each other. "Have you seen the new girl? She has no experience. Who does she think she is?" Emily felt a mixture of embarrassment and shame. She knew she wasn't allowed to reveal her true identity, but every comment, every whisper made her realize how fragile she felt in that role. Even though she'd grown up with privilege and authority, she was now just another employee, vulnerable to judgment and ridicule. When she entered a room that needed cleaning, a colleague, Sandra, the most experienced in the department, looked at her for a long time. "You've never done this before, have you?" she said with a slight mocking smile. Emily nodded, unable to lie further. The colleague shook her head, but said nothing more. Despite the embarrassment, Emily felt a silent respect grow for these women and men who, every day, had to demonstrate patience and discretion in an environment where the slightest mistake could attract criticism and humiliation. In the break room, Emily sat alone on a chair, quickly eating a cold sandwich. The other employees were already gathered around, laughing and sharing stories, some of them furtively glancing at her. She realized that being invisible was a difficult exercise. Every action was observed, every gesture judged. Even her breaks, so innocuous to her before, were becoming a moment of anxiety. Emily also understood that the hotel wasn't just a workplace for these employees, it was a silent battlefield, where every day they had to fight to maintain their dignity in the face of arrogant guests and sometimes ruthless colleagues. And she, by her mere disguised presence, was disrupting this fragile balance. As she put away the cleaning cart, Emily reflected that this experience was not only a way to understand the lives of her staff, but a mirror to her own prejudices and ignorance about the reality of those who served her daily. And for the first time, she felt vulnerable, powerless, and deeply human. Emily was beginning to settle into the hotel's exhausting routine, but the fatigue and pressure were starting to take their toll. She found herself in the presidential suite, determined to meticulously clean every corner. Everything seemed to be going well, until one simple gesture changed everything. While wiping down a coffee table, she dropped a glass of red wine. The liquid quickly spilled onto the luxurious carpet. Her heart raced. She knew this seemingly innocuous task could lead to disaster. Before she could react, the floor manager, Mrs. Hastings, entered the suite. Her face crumpled when she saw the wine on the carpet. "What have you done?" she shouted, her voice echoing like thunder in the room. "How dare you be so careless? You will clean this up immediately." Emily complied, her heart pounding, but the humiliation didn't end there. Mrs. Hastings began to berate her in front of the customers waiting in the hallway. "Look at this incompetence. Even the simplest task seems beyond your capabilities." The other employees, some sympathetic, others amused, watched the scene. Emily felt ashamed, but she couldn't say anything, nor could she explain her true identity. Every word of reproach reminded her how vulnerable staff could be to harsh, often unfair, criticism from superiors and customers. As she desperately scrubbed the carpet, Emily realized that this experience was much more than a mere disguise. She now felt, in her flesh and mind, what dozens of people experience daily, a mixture of humiliation, stress, and constant vulnerability. That evening, when she returned to the small maid's room, she was exhausted, not only physically, but mentally. The lesson was clear: the lives of these employees were a delicate balance of hard work, resilience, and the ability to withstand injustice. And for Emily, this simple incident had just become one of the most revealing moments of her life. On the 5th day, Emily began to feel the weight of her immersion. The physical fatigue was now accompanied by a heavy mental strain. Every forced smile, every precise gesture, and every discreet glance became a constant effort. She realized that the real difficulty was not just working hard, but remaining invisible and silent, never being able to defend herself or ask for recognition. During her break, she settled into the small staff room, away from the laughter and chatter of the other employees. The air was stifling, heavy with the smell of cleaning products and cold coffee. She sat on a worn chair, quickly eating a sandwich and observing the corridors. The contrast between her life as a privileged heiress and this isolated world was striking. Where she had always been protected, here she had to face everything alone. Other employees walked past her, some barely greeting her, others casting suspicious glances. Emily understood that loneliness wasn't just physical, but social and emotional. Being perceived as inferior, even temporarily, instantly isolated someone. And in that position, every mistake could be magnified, every misstep judged harshly. She thought back to all the times she'd ignored or quickly judged her hotel staff. How many times had she taken their patience, their professionalism, their resilience for granted? Now she felt the weight of those invisible days, the constant stress of having to remain impeccable while enduring criticism and humiliation. For the first time, Emily felt real empathy for these men and women who, day after day, faced this loneliness and humiliation without ever complaining. She understood that respect and dignity are not acquired, but silent battles that many wage every day. This reflection became an inner revelation for Emily. Her experience was not a mere observation game. She was learning, in pain and solitude, the value of humility and the importance of treating each person with respect, regardless of their role or status. One morning, as Emily was tackling the executive suite floor, she was called to help prepare a room for a special client, Mr. James Harrison, a businessman known for his calm demeanor and respect for others. Unlike previous clients, Harrison didn't have a judgmental gaze or an authoritarian tone. He seemed observant, attentive, and human. As Emily was arranging the pillows and wiping down the furniture, Harrison entered the room. She was expecting the worst, but to her surprise, he smiled slightly and said, "You're doing a wonderful job." "I know it's not easy." Emily, bewildered and almost moved, replied with a simple, "Thank you, sir." She felt a weight lift from her shoulders. For the first time, someone was seeing her effort, without judgment or unnecessary criticism. They chatted for a few minutes, Harrison asking simple questions about work and life at the hotel, but always with respect. Emily found herself answering him honestly, briefly describing the difficulty of some of the tasks and the constant pressure of demanding guests. Harrison nodded in understanding and added, "What you do is important. Without people like you, this hotel would be nothing." This encounter marked a turning point for Emily. She understood that, even in a world where contempt and humiliation seemed to dominate, there were customers capable of respect and gratitude. Kindness and consideration, even expressed through a simple smile or a kind word, had the power to restore confidence and motivation. As she completed her task in this suite, Emily felt an unusual warmth in her heart. She understood that her experience was not only a lesson in suffering and humiliation, but also an opportunity to discover the kindness and humanity that existed even in the most demanding environments. For the first time since her immersion began, Emily emerged from a room with a genuine smile, aware that all the lessons she was receiving, good or bad, were shaping her understanding of life and other people. A few days later, Emily was tasked with cleaning the rooms on a floor reserved for VIP guests. Everything seemed to be going smoothly until one of them arrived, a visibly drunk man, Mr. Thomas Whitman, who staggered down the hallway before abruptly entering the suite Emily had just prepared. Without even taking the time to look around, Whitman pointed at a vase on a table and yelled, "You stole this. Give it back to me right now." Emily, shocked and trembling, tried to protest, "Sir, I didn't take anything, I assure you." But her words were drowned out by the man's anger. He began to humiliate her in front of the staff passing by and the other customers waiting in the lobby. "You're incompetent. How dare you work here?" Emily felt her face burn with shame. She had never been treated like this in her privileged life, and she had to absorb every word without being able to explain that she wasn't really an ordinary employee. As she calmly tried to retrieve the vase, her hands trembled. Every gesture seemed amplified under Whitman's contemptuous gaze and the staff's whispers. Emily understood that life for those who worked in the hotel was a constant struggle against injustice and vulnerability. A simple mistake, real or fabricated, could trigger devastating public humiliation. At that moment, Emily fully felt the loneliness and fragility of her role. She understood how much courage it took to continue working with dignity, even when the whole world seemed to be against you. This painful experience strengthened her empathy and awareness of the daily reality of staff. When the drunken man was finally escorted out by security, Emily stood for a few minutes, breathing deeply, trying to calm her heart and regain her composure. She knew now that her immersion wasn't just a game, it was a life lesson that was being taught through pain, humiliation, and vulnerability. That day had a profound impact on her. She had experienced firsthand the harshness of the invisible world of those who serve, and she understood that respect and dignity are daily struggles, often silent but essential. A few days after the incident with the drunk customer, Emily was beginning to feel slightly more confident in her role as Lisa. She was more familiar with the routines, the hallways, and even some of the regular customers. But she hadn't expected a simple detail to betray her true identity. As she walked down the main hallway with her cleaning cart, a colleague, Mark, the floor maintenance manager, stared at her for a long time. His eyes fell on an inconspicuous ring on her finger, a unique piece of jewelry owned only by the Thompson family. He frowned. "Emily Thompson," he whispered incredulously. Emily felt her heart stop. How had he guessed? Panic rose quickly, but she knew there was no denying the truth. "Yes, it's me, but I didn't mean to," she stammered, unable to find the right words. Mark, surprised but quickly understanding, looked at her with a mixture of shock and curiosity. The other employees, drawn into the conversation, began to gather. The murmur turned into a flood of questions and reactions, astonishment, skepticism, and for some, a sense of betrayal. Emily took a deep breath and explained, "I wanted to understand the reality of your job, what you experience every day, what you endure, and how important your role is to this hotel. I never meant to offend or mislead you." Silence fell in the hallway. Some employees seemed touched by her sincerity, others hesitated, frustrated at having been deceived. Emily understood that her approach, though motivated by curiosity and a desire to learn, had also upset the fragile balance of the staff. For Emily, this revelation was a moment of complete vulnerability. She had been humiliated, criticized, and confronted with the harshness of this invisible world, but now she had to face the judgment of those she had sought to understand. This was the price of her lesson. Discovering the reality of others sometimes meant putting herself in danger. By the end of the day, after long discussions and sincere apologies, most of the employees understood her intentions. They began to see that Emily hadn't been trying to mock them, but to learn and empathize with their daily lives. And for Emily, this confrontation was a turning point. She understood that respect had to be earned and expressed, and that the truth, even painful, is always necessary for growth. After her revelation, Emily realized it wasn't enough to simply explain her approach to a few colleagues. She needed to reach out to the entire staff to rebuild trust and demonstrate her sincerity. She asked management to book the hotel's main meeting room and invited everyone, from the front desk to the housekeepers, kitchen staff, and maintenance staff. As the staff entered the room, some were wary, others curious, and a few smiled shyly, recalling recent events. Emily, now dressed in her own clothes, stepped onto the makeshift stage, her heart pounding. I know what I did may have surprised you, even frustrated you, she began. I posed as an employee under the name Lisa to understand your work, to feel what you experience every day. And I now realize how demanding and sometimes thankless this role is. I am deeply sorry for not trusting you and for deceiving you. Silence reigned in the room. The employees listened attentively, some with tears in their eyes, touched by the sincerity of his words. Emily continued, I thank you for your patience, professionalism, and resilience. You are the heart of this hotel, and without you, none of this would be possible. I am committed to making a difference, improving your conditions, and ensuring that your work is recognized and respected. At the end of her speech, applause erupted. The skeptical faces softened, and several employees came over to shake her hand, some with warm smiles. Emily felt a wave of gratitude and relief wash over her. This moment of forgiveness and recognition was more powerful than anything she had experienced since the beginning of her immersion. For Emily, this reunion was not only a gesture of reconciliation, but a true life lesson. Humility and respect are earned, and recognizing the value of others strengthens bonds and collective work. She understood that her role as the owner's daughter meant nothing compared to the dignity and strength of those who worked every day to keep the hotel running. That evening, as she walked home, Emily felt transformed. She knew she had learned one of the most important lessons of her life: empathy, appreciation, and respect are not learned in comfort, but through experience and humility. In the following weeks, Emily didn't just talk the talk, she took action. She reorganized some of the hotel's procedures to improve employees' daily lives, created training and recognition programs, and established regular times for staff to voice their needs and suggestions without fear. Each initiative reflected the lesson she had learned during her immersion: respect and dignity are not privileges, but fundamental rights. The employees, who had initially viewed her with suspicion, began to see the sincerity of her efforts. Smiles multiplied in the hallways, compliments became more frequent, and a spirit of collaboration took hold. Emily had transformed not only her own perception, but that of the entire hotel. For her, this experience had been much more than a mere game or curiosity. She had touched the reality of those who work in the shadows, confronted humiliation and fatigue, and learned to fully respect every effort. The owner's daughter was no longer just a privileged heiress, she had become an ally and defender of the staff, capable of understanding and acting with empathy. One evening, watching the hotel corridors from the balcony of her office, Emily reflected on every difficult moment, every unfair criticism, and every humiliation she had endured. She smiled softly, aware that these experiences, however painful, had shaped her maturity and her understanding of the world. The lesson was clear: true wealth lies not only in money or power, but in the ability to recognize and respect the dignity of others. Emily knew she would never see her hotel, her staff, or her own life the same way again. And in that silence filled with light and gratitude, she finally understood that every person, whatever their position, deserves respect, recognition, and humanity.